In the suburbs of Denver, tucked inside a weathered wooden cafe during the heart of winter, a girl named Lily once whispered to me, "I don't know why, but I always feel like people are pretending, even when they smile so sincerely." I smiled, not because her words were naive, but because they were heartbreakingly true. You know more than you think, not through words, but through the glance that drifts away when a story becomes too real, through the overly long laugh, through the hand that clenches a coffee cup long after it's gone cold. People leave traces, not in the sand, but in the small cracks of who they are. Friedrich Nietzsche, the philosopher so often branded as ruthless, was actually trying to teach us just one thing: how to see without judging. This video isn't a list of 18 tips to read someone. It's a 3-part journey, each part a deeper layer of truth. If you skip even one part, you'll miss the core message. We don't learn to read others in order to control them. We learn to connect, and above all, to understand ourselves. Part 1. Masks and Armor. In the state of Ohio, there was a man named Carl. He lived alone, smiled often, helped neighbors take out their trash, and never let anyone see him cry. Everyone said Carl was doing just fine, until the day his ex-wife died of cancer, and no one saw him at the funeral. No explanation, no tears. The truth was, Carl was not fine. He simply wore thick armor forged from being abandoned, from crying in front of someone he loved, and being called weak for it. From a young age, we're taught to be strong, to be resilient. But Nietzsche, with eyes that pierced through the soul, once warned, "Every profound spirit needs a mask, not to deceive, but to survive." You see a woman who's overly kind to everyone? Don't assume she's a saint. Maybe she's so afraid of being disliked, she no longer knows how to be real. You meet a man who always laughs loud and seems unshakable? Maybe he's crumbling inside, just praying no one notices. What we call personality is sometimes just armor, forged in years of fear. But the cruel twist is this: those who wear masks often have no idea they're wearing them. They act as if they're living authentically. But in truth, they're reenacting a script that life once forced them to memorize. A man who was beaten for crying will grow up never crying again, and teach his son to do the same. So the next time you meet someone cold, distant, or too perfect to be true, remember this: they're not hiding from you. They're hiding from themselves. Part 2. Projection and the Truth. At a corporate seminar in Chicago, there was a woman named Diane who kept criticizing a colleague as arrogant and too self-confident. That colleague? A young woman recently promoted. Quiet, respectful, never raised her voice. The fascinating thing is, Diane didn't realize she was talking about herself. Nietzsche called this projection. When we see something we hate in others, we're often staring straight at the part of ourselves we haven't dared to face. The one who mocks pretense is often scared of being authentic. The one who cries liar may be hiding their own truth. Have you ever met someone who constantly criticizes others for being too sensitive? Chances are they were never allowed to cry as a child. They learned to hate vulnerability. Not because they're strong, but because they were forced to be. Nietzsche didn't use projection as a weapon. He used it as a mirror. And so should you. The next time someone won't stop judging others, don't get swept away by their words. Listen instead to the fear that's trembling behind their anger. Because hatred rarely comes from malice. It often comes from a wound that's never been allowed to heal. Part 3. When Silence Speaks. At a dinner table in Sacramento, after roasted chicken and a few glasses of wine, a father asked his grown son, "Are you okay?" The son simply smiled, took a sip of water, and lowered his head. No answer. No eye contact, not a single complaint. And in that silence, everything was said. Nietzsche once wrote that language is the tool of the herd, a way to cover fear, not to express truth. The ones who hurt the most are often the ones who stay silent the longest. You won't find truth in the words, "I'm fine." You'll find it in the glance that turns away, in the sharp breath when a familiar name is mentioned, in the hesitation before answering a simple question. Are you happy? Silence isn't empty. It's a confession that dares not speak. And if you know how to listen, you'll realize the one avoiding pain is often speaking the loudest through their silence. Part 4. The Virtue That Hides Vanity. In a small church in Texas, I once met a woman named Margot, always saying the right things, always condemning the wrong ones. She often reminded others to be humble, to live by the word. But when a young girl confessed she was pregnant out of wedlock, Margot was the first to turn away. Nietzsche called this the will to power disguised as morality. The louder someone shouts about purity, the more likely they are hiding something. True virtue doesn't need grand speeches. It's quiet, like someone wiping another's tears without asking why, like someone opening their arms to failure, instead of casting stones. But the kind of morality that shouts too loudly, that's often a mask, a fragile pride trying to hold itself together. Don't trust the one who insists on looking pure. Trust the one who forgives quietly, because real goodness doesn't need an audience. Part 5. They lie to themselves first. In a bookstore in Portland, I once witnessed a quiet breakup. The girl said, "I'm fine, really, I'm okay," then looked down and closed an old novel, as if folding her heart between its pages. The boy nodded, pretending to believe her words. But he didn't. And neither did she. Nietzsche once said, "People don't lie to you first, they lie to themselves." When someone says, "I'm okay, I don't need anyone, I've moved on," don't rush to believe, but also don't rush to blame. It's not a lie meant to hurt you. It's a prayer they've repeated too many times, just to keep going. Because self-deception isn't malice, it's survival when truth becomes too heavy to carry. And if you're sensitive enough to see the cracks in their story, don't use it to judge them. Use it to understand. They've lived in the dark so long that hiding the light became second nature. Part 6. False Superiority. In a high-rise office building in Manhattan, there was a boss named Eric. He constantly boasted about his achievements, how many deals he had closed, how many hours he worked, how many employees admired him. But in closed-door meetings, when no one was watching, his hands trembled slightly when presenting to upper management. And whenever someone disagreed with him, he snapped. Not because they were wrong, but because he was afraid of being seen as inadequate. Nietzsche once said, "Where someone acts superior is often where they're hiding inferiority." True confidence needs no proof. It doesn't roar. It rests in quiet. When someone keeps reminding you how smart, how strong, how right they are, don't feel threatened. Look closer. You might just see a child who was once compared, once forgotten, now shouting, "I matter?" Nietzsche didn't teach us to despise people like Eric. He taught us to listen behind the crown, because sometimes what looks like pride is simply a cloak over a soul that was never told it was enough. Part 7. Most actions are driven by fear. At a family gathering in Charlotte, North Carolina, I once observed a man named Brian. He talked endlessly, so fast no one could interrupt. He laughed loudly, told story after story, as if afraid that silence might kill the room. But I noticed, every time someone tried to shift the topic towards something deeper, love, loss, memory, Brian quickly steered it back to a joke. And I knew he didn't talk so much because he was confident. He talked because he was afraid of truly being heard. Nietzsche once said, "Most human behavior doesn't come from desire. It comes from fear of loss." We say yes to avoid abandonment. We disappear to avoid being hurt. We stretch ourselves to please, so we won't be rejected. You've seen the person who always says yes, even when their eyes say no. That person isn't weak. They're just scared that if they are truly themselves, they'll lose love. Nietzsche didn't write about fear as the enemy. He saw it as a map. And if you follow it, you'll understand a person far better than any word they ever say. So don't ask, what do they want? Ask instead, what are they afraid of losing? The answer is there, always. Part 8. Criticism is a mirror. At a small barber shop in Nashville, Tennessee, an older man named Walter often grumbled, "Kids today are so soft, always with the feelings." But one day, when his gray hair, the last thing that reminded him of his late wife, was accidentally trimmed too short, he sat quietly. No yelling, no anger, just a hint of tears in his eyes. And he turned away quickly. Nietzsche saw this long ago. People don't criticize what doesn't touch them. They criticize what they're struggling with inside. Walter didn't hate emotions. He simply had never been allowed to express them without being seen as weak. The person who mocks vanity might be at war with their own reflection. The one who calls others selfish might be someone who was once abandoned and hasn't forgiven the pain. Nietzsche didn't tell us to ignore criticism. He taught us to listen. Because often, the person shouting is not condemning. They're confessing what they can't say out loud. Because criticism, if you're attentive enough, is a confession in disguise. Part 9. Guilt behind false confidence. At a university hall in Boston, there was a lecturer named Dr. Caleb Monroe. He always spoke clearly, never hesitated, always well-groomed, punctual, in control of every detail of his lectures. Everyone thought he was the perfect model of composure and success, but after class, in an empty room with no students around, I saw him sit alone for a long time, staring at an ungraded test, sighing as if he carried a guilt with no name. Nietzsche once observed, "Excessive confidence is often how people hide what they're running from." Caleb didn't act confident out of arrogance. He did it because maybe, in the past, he failed and never forgave himself. Maybe he once did something that drove someone away. And now, he strives for perfection, so he'll never be left again. Sometimes, the ones who seem unshakable are the very ones who are desperately trying to prove they deserve to exist. Nietzsche didn't teach us to distrust the successful. He taught us to ask, what are they trying to cover with all that shine? Because true confidence doesn't need to shout, it only needs peace. Part 10. Exaggeration reveals insecurity. At a quiet bar in Austin, Texas, I once heard a man named Rick speak loudly. "I don't care what anyone thinks about me. I always keep it real." But the strange thing was, he repeated that sentence 3 times in under 10 minutes. And when his girlfriend stepped outside to take a phone call longer than usual, Rick became visibly uneasy, gripping his beer so tightly it nearly cracked. Nietzsche wouldn't be surprised. Exaggeration, he wrote, isn't a bigger truth. It's insecurity, screamed out loud. Those who keep saying, I'm happy, I'm strong, I'm in control, are often the ones trying hard to believe it themselves. Because if you truly didn't care what others thought, you wouldn't need to say it. You'd just live. Exaggeration is the voice of the ego, trying to drown out the whisper inside. I'm scared. I'm uncertain. I'm shaking. Nietzsche taught us, don't be dazzled by loud declarations. Listen instead to the trembling silence behind them, because sometimes the loudest voice in the room is the cry of someone who no longer believes in themselves. Part 11. The desire for control hides inner chaos. In the suburbs of Minnesota, there was a mother named Linda. Her home was as clean as a hospital. Not a speck of dust on the floor. Curtains always straight. Towels folded just right. Dinner was planned a week in advance. And if her husband came home 5 minutes late, Linda would cry quietly in the bathroom, not even knowing why. Nietzsche once wrote, when a person is in chaos inside, they try to control everything on the outside. Linda didn't manage everything because she was strong. She did it because, inside, lived a memory without order. A childhood with an alcoholic father, where every meal felt like gambling with fate. She once lived in uncontrollable chaos. Now even a single fork out of place sends her spiraling. Control isn't pride. It's a protective wall built by someone who was once abandoned. Nietzsche didn't judge people like Linda. He gently reminded us, the ones who cling the tightest are often the ones who've lost the most. Part 12. The louder the performance, the emptier the core. In Los Angeles, I used to follow a woman named Valerie on social media. She was always radiant. Photos from Bali, brunches with friends, early morning gym shots, coffee cups with inspirational quotes. Every story perfectly filtered. Every post a declaration of freedom. But when I met her in real life, on a gloomy Monday afternoon, she sat curled in a corner of a cafe. No makeup, hands trembling around her phone, as if afraid the world was moving on without her. Nietzsche once said, loud performances don't hide the truth, they reveal the emptiness. Valerie wasn't fake. She was just afraid that if people didn't see her, no one would remember she ever existed. Performers aren't always the strong ones. Sometimes, performers are people begging to be seen. Just once, without a filter, without likes. Nietzsche didn't condemn them. He simply reminded us. What looks too perfect is rarely real. It's often the faint cry of a soul feeling lost. Part 13. No one truly speaks from logic, they speak from pain. In New Jersey, during an evening class for adults, there was a man named Marcus. When the class began discussing love and trust, Marcus suddenly stood up and shouted, "Love is just an illusion. Only fools fall in love." The room went silent. Some chuckled, but I didn't. I looked at his hands, the hands of a man who had once loved and once lost. And I knew. Marcus wasn't speaking from reason. He was speaking from the scar left behind by a woman who had walked away without a word. Nietzsche once said, "Human reasoning is just clothing for wounds we can't name." We don't form our beliefs from clarity. We form them from the fear of being hurt again. And then, we wrap them in logic, theories, and books, like armor. So when someone says, marriage is a prison, or no one can be trusted, don't ask, what do they believe? Ask, what have they lost? Nietzsche didn't want us to shatter arguments. He wanted us to understand that every carefully worded belief, is a letter from a heart still afraid. Part 14. How someone reacts to weakness reveals their true character. In a restaurant in Phoenix, Arizona, I once watched a young waiter drop a tray of glasses in front of the guests. Glass shattered, water spilled across the floor. The entire restaurant went silent. A well-dressed man stood up. He didn't yell. He didn't make a scene. He simply handed the waiter a napkin and softly said, "Hey, it's okay, are you all right?" The waiter bowed deeply in thanks. And the look in his eyes, it wasn't fear, it was gratitude. Nietzsche once said, "True strength is not shown through domination, but through restraint." Anyone can appear strong from a position of power, but only someone who has overcome their past can be gentle with those who are struggling. The one who mocks weakness is often someone who was never accepted when they were vulnerable. The one who doesn't forgive small mistakes may have grown up in a home where mistakes were never allowed. Nietzsche didn't measure strength by shouting. He measured it by silence. The silence of someone who could strike, but chooses to set their hand down. And if you really want to know who someone is, watch how they act when no one is watching. Part 15. When someone fears being forgotten, they chase attention. In downtown Miami, there was a woman named Crystal, 52 years old, working as a receptionist at a law firm. Every day at work, she wore bright dresses, carefully applied makeup, and never forgot to update her Facebook status. "I'm shining. Who loves me today?" Some co-workers whispered behind her back, calling her too much, but no one knew that 3 years ago, Crystal had left a 22-year marriage. One where every word she spoke was ignored, where her presence was invisible. Nietzsche didn't see people who crave attention as shallow. He saw them as souls who had once been forgotten and were now trying to remind the world they still exist. "External noise," he wrote, "is often the cry of a heart that's been neglected." The one who keeps telling stories about themselves may have been the child left behind after a birthday party. The one who needs to be at the center may have once been the person no one looked for when they disappeared. Nietzsche taught us not to judge such performance with mockery, but with a gentle question. If they were silent, would anyone remember they were here? Because sometimes what we think is a hunger for attention is really just the fear of being erased. Part 16. The people they attack are often the ones they envy. At a high school reunion party in Kansas City, a man named Jared, now a successful engineer, sipped his drink and said with a mocking tone, "That guy Adam? A starving artist who thinks he's Van Gogh." Everyone laughed along, but just a few minutes later, Jared quietly scrolled through Adam's Instagram page, full of vibrant paintings and a life unbound by payrolls or deadlines. Nietzsche once said, "We don't just envy success, we envy the freedom we never gave ourselves." People don't always attack because they hate. Sometimes they attack because they once dreamed like you did, but never had the courage to follow it through. The one who mocks your happiness may have once lost faith in love. The one who laughs at your freedom may still be shackled to a dream that was never allowed to bloom. Nietzsche didn't teach us to fight back. He taught us to listen behind the attack, to hear the sigh of a soul that once abandoned itself. Envy doesn't say, "I hate you." It whispers, "I wish I were you, but I don't believe I deserve to be." Part 17. Adults are just replaying an unhealed childhood. In a quiet neighborhood in Milwaukee, I once spoke with a man named Thomas, a sharp lawyer, never yielding, always in control. In meetings, he interrupted others, spoke quickly, spoke often, as if pausing would let someone else get ahead. But over coffee one afternoon, when no role had to be played, Thomas confessed, "I used to be a kid no one listened to. Every time I spoke, my father told me I was annoying." Nietzsche once said, "People don't live from ideals. They relive their past." The person who doesn't listen today may once have been a child left unheard. The one who fears showing emotion may have been punished for crying. The one who does everything to be loved may have had to perform just to be seen. Nietzsche didn't blame them. He placed a hand on humanity's shoulder and gently reminded us, they're not cruel. They're just acting out the script childhood gave them. No new lines, no different ending. And if you look past the brittle surface with kindness, you'll see, behind every adult is a child still waiting to be held and told, "You are enough." Part 18. Every behavior is a silent confession. At a small gas station outside Atlanta, I met a woman named Teresa, 45 years old, who had changed jobs over 10 times in 5 years. She was always the one to start first, leave first, end it first. Her friends called her the woman who couldn't commit. But no one ever asked, what is she running from? Nietzsche had already answered, repeated behavior is not meaningless. It is a confession, written not in words, but in habits. The person who keeps choosing those who don't love them back isn't foolish. They are reliving a familiar feeling, the feeling of abandonment that childhood never healed. The one who works themselves to exhaustion isn't more diligent than others. They're just afraid that if they stop, they'll hear the hollow echo inside. You don't need to ask someone, "What are you hiding?" Just observe what they keep repeating. Nietzsche didn't ask us to judge. He invited us to listen deeper, not with ears, but with the heart. The one who disappears when things get serious isn't avoiding you. They're avoiding a memory that once shattered them. The one who always makes others laugh isn't necessarily happy. They're just afraid that if they show sadness, the whole room will walk away. Behavior is a language. And if you listen long enough, you'll hear what no one dared to say. This is where I hurt. This is what I never overcame. Nietzsche didn't want us to become manipulators. He wanted us to become those who can see the cracks and still choose to love the whole person. Conclusion. See others. Understand yourself. If you've made it this far, through the masks, the scars, the patterns, then maybe you've understood. We don't learn to read people to become wiser. We learn to become gentler. Nietzsche didn't write these truths to give you power. He wrote them so you could let go of judgment. Because the more clearly we understand people, the more we see. No one is truly evil. They are just hurting, afraid, and surviving the only way they know how. And you too, maybe somewhere in these 18 truths, you saw yourself. You saw the cycles. You saw the armor. You saw wounds you thought were gone, still shaping your choices. Nietzsche didn't knock you down. He placed a hand on your shoulder and whispered, "To see clearly doesn't make you cold. It makes you the one this world needs most. Someone who sees and still chooses to love." If this video made you pause, not to analyze, but to feel, leave a word for someone who needs to know they're not alone. And if you want to keep walking the path of understanding others and healing yourself, subscribe to this channel, because this is just the beginning.